Okay, here we are. Final video in the free Adobe Premiere Pro 101 course here. We've talked about creating a workspace that works for you. We've talked about importing your files, organizing them, creating a timeline, syncing it up with audio and video and multiple cameras, doing some basic editing, how to export it. But this last little piece here is color correcting. And I think that this is something that can help you take your videos to the next level because of just how quick people make reactions to how video looks. It's really important to have it looking at least properly, if not necessarily stylized or graded, but at least making your video look as good as it possibly can, even if you recorded it on something like an iPhone or something like that. So let's dive into color correcting in Premiere Pro. So the first thing you want to do is switch workspaces to be in the new color grading, color correcting workspace in Premiere. So go ahead and go to Window, Workspaces, and then click Color. And it'll move everything around for you. And what this will do is it will give you more control and easier access to the tools that you're going to use to color correct. So the Lumetri scopes are something that you want to learn how to use, and you can right click on them and actually change what it is you're looking at. So you can use a histogram if you prefer. If you're coming from a photography world, you might understand that a little more. But really looking at this RGB parade and the RGB waveform is usually the best way to get started with color grading and color correcting with video. So RGB, red, green, blue. Your camera records in those three colors, and everything else is a mixture of different amounts of those colors. And how this thing reads is at the bottom is it's completely dark. It's completely blacked out, and you can't see any of that. It's just completely black. So something super, super dark. And at the top is going to be something that's overexposed and completely blown out and really white. So let me play around with some of the adjustments in the Lumetri color panel on the right here to show you how that affects the RGB parade and waveform. So if I change exposure, which means making it brighter or darker, you can see as I drag it up, the entire RGB parade starts to move up. And then if I dragged it way up, you can see that a bunch of stuff is above 100. Everything's really blown out and too bright. And if I bring it down too far, everything gets really dark. So you can see, let's bring it back to 0 there. You can see as I bring it up here, that's probably a decent exposure level because I'm going between 10 and around 90, not losing any detail in the highlights, not losing any detail in the shadows down below 0. And this shot is in a very controlled studio environment like this where I've set it up so I won't have things that are overexposed or underexposed. But if you're shooting outside, you're going to need to use these types of sliders to make an impact on your image. So usually the first thing you want to do is get that color temperature right. My white balance seemed pretty proper here when I shot it, but if I want it to be a little cooler or a little warmer, you can play around with that as well. You can always double click them to reset. And I don't really need much tint. I could make it a little bit more green and I wouldn't be so red, or bring in the red a little bit to add some more color into my skin tone, but I'm just gonna leave it at 0 for now. So I move the exposure a little bit, and then think of contrast as spreading out the waveform. So if I up the contrast, that means the whiters are whiter, the blacks and the shadows are darker, and so it kind of stretches out this waveform. So if I move the contrast, you can see it start to stretch out and eventually reach all the way into down to 0 and up to 100. But you can see in my image, that's way too much contrast. So if I bring it back down to 0 and I maybe just bring it up a little bit, maybe to like 23 or something, it's basically just giving more range of brightness and darkness in the image and stretching out so that there's more contrast, there's more change between the blacks in the dark sections and the whites in the brighter sections. So you can actually change contrast that way. So play the contrast a little bit, and then highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks are kind of self-explanatory, but highlights would be all the brighter parts, shadows would be the darker parts, Whites would be the pure white sections and blacks would be the pure black sections. And you can play with those a little bit. So if I want to make this image a little brighter, I might bring the highlights up a little bit, maybe bring the shadows down a little more, do a little bit like that. And you can see I have a much more dynamic image. It might be a little bit too stylized for what you're trying to do, but just know that these are the tools that you use to try to save some of the information in the shadows and bring that up, or if something's too bright, you can bring it down. And those are the main things you're going to want to do. Saturation is one that you can also play with, which just makes the colors a little bit more strong. So if I bring a saturation up to 150, you can see the colors are super, super strong. Bring it back down to like, let's say like 75. It looks like this was shot in the 70s or something on one of those cameras. So you usually want to stay around 100, but if you want a little bit more saturation, go to like 110, 115. You want a little less, maybe go to like 95 or 90 to desaturate a little bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave that at 100. Now there are 4 other different sections here after this basic correction. And we didn't even talk about lookup tables, which if you're going to get into filmmaking and use different camera profiles that are flat, you're probably going to want to get into LUTs and figuring out which one to use for your camera. But let's go now into creative, which has built-in looks that Adobe has added. So let's say I want a look of Fuji F125. You can see it's really, really dramatic. But what I can do is, instead of having the intensity at 100, is if I bring it down to 0, that's where I started at. And so I could bring in just a little bit, go to like 35. Then my video has a little bit of style with that look on it that Adobe has added in here. And you can also click through and get a preview of some of the different options. So let's say Gold Sport. Let me go to Gold Sport here. You can see what that does. And if I did the intensity 100, it would look ridiculous. So go 0 and then just maybe add a little bit. And this is one way to get your videos to have a certain look and feel that no one else is really going to have, because they're going to just record on their camera and then edit it and upload it directly to the web. They're not going to take this extra step to add a little bit of a style to their videos. So you do the basic correcting, then you start to play with the style a little bit. You can fade it so it's more film-like, which you can see has less contrast. It's moving the RGB parade in waveform a bit. You can sharpen it a little bit, make it a little more vibrant, more saturation. You can tint the shadows, and then you can go into the curves, and you can make the curves and make it more dramatic. So there are a lot of things you can do within this different this lumetri panel, and do different things with colors. Let's say really wanted it to be saturated, but not with red. So I could bring down reds a little bit here. So you can like make your video look really bad, and you probably don't really want to do that. So let me go ahead and just reset that. And you can uncheck these if you want to see what they're doing to your image. But you can go ahead and just click auto, and then you can play around with vignettes if you want to and make it really dramatic, or a reverse vignette, and change the midpoint for how extreme it is and how round it is. But basically you can get in and you can mess up your video, or you can make it look a little better. And I just wanted to make a short video for you on doing the basics of this panel, because it is super daunting. And if you're shooting in the same environment every single time, you could create a preset from this. So you could say, I really like this look that I have here. Let me go ahead and go to my effect controls on this clip. You can take this, right click and say save preset, name it, and then down in your effects, you'll actually have a preset that says in studio, vignetted, dramatic look, or something like that. And then you only have to do it that one time, and you don't have to color correct every single time shooting in the exact same environment a bunch of videos. You can just take that look and apply it to your video. So hopefully this gets you into dabbling a little bit with color correction and color grading. And if you want to go more in depth on this specific stuff, or Premiere Pro in general, with a full course that's covering every little option, every little tool, and how to do bigger productions within Adobe Premiere Pro, you can check out my course about Adobe Premiere Pro and see if you want to learn more there. Thanks so much for watching through this free video series on Adobe Premiere Pro 101. Let me know what you think. Hit me up on Twitter or on YouTube or something and give me some feedback on the course. And I hope to see you inside other video tutorials that I make or possibly in the full Adobe Premiere Pro course. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Cheers.